For 2 years after I completed my obediences or tasks as a novice, I read the Holy Psalter unceasingly in the special prescribed rite. This is a particular tradition. Prayers in the monastery cease neither by day nor by night and are intermingled with the reading of the Psalter, after which there are further readings of particular prayers for health or for the repose of departed souls. My turn for vigil prayer came late at night from 11 o'clock until midnight. I was relieved by Father Melchizedek. He in turn carried on reading the Psalter until 2 o'clock in the morning. Father Melchizedek was a remarkable and most mysterious man of faith. Except at divine services, you could hardly ever get a glance at him in the monastery. He appeared for meals with the rest of the brotherhood only on feast days. Even then, he would sit at the table with his head drooping beneath his cowl and would hardly touch any food. The taking of monastic Schema vows in the Russian Orthodox Church involves the very highest degree of ascetic withdrawal from the world. The monk who does this forgoes all other services and tasks except for prayer. As in the taking of monastic vows, someone who receives the great monastic schema has his name changed. Bishops who undertake the schema are freed from their duties of governing their bishoprics, while monks and priests who undertake these vows are freed of all other duties whatsoever except for prayer and spiritual reflection. Father Melchizedek would always appear beneath the vaults of the small and dimly lit church of St. Lazarus, the place where the Psalms were always read aloud unceasingly, exactly 1 minute before the time when the bells of the monastery were about to ring 12 midnight. He would stand by the royal doors, as we call the holy gates of the altar in the center of the iconostasis, and slowly bow 3 times, waiting for me to approach. Having blessed me, he would gesture that I could go now, so as to leave him in the perfect contemplation and peace needed for prayer. For 1 entire year, he never said a single word to me. It is written in an ancient monastic collection of the sayings of saints and ascetics that there was a custom that 3 monks would annually pay a visit to Abba Anthony the Great. 2 of them would speak on themes related to the salvation of the soul, while the third would remain silent the entire time, never asking Abba Anthony anything at all. After many years of this, Abba Anthony finally asked this 3rd monk, "You've been coming to visit me for so many years. Why is it that you never ask me anything unlike the others?" The 3rd monk replied, "For me, Father, it is sufficient simply to look at you." By this time, I already understood how extraordinarily lucky I was to be able to simply see this remarkable ascetic every night, even if all I could do was simply look at him, but not speak to him. However, once I actually was bold enough to dare disturb the ritual that we had long since established. Moreover, when Father Melchizedek, as usual, blessed me by the royal doors at the entrance to the altar, I found the courage within myself to finally ask the question that not only I, but virtually all the novices and young monks of the monastery dreamed of asking him. Before Father Melchizedek had taken the great monastic schema, he had served in the monastery like all the other priests, and was known as Father Michael. He was a very skilled and hard-working carpenter in the churches, as well as in the cells of our monastic brotherhood. Indeed, to this day, we have kept icon frames, lecterns, chairs, tables, chests of drawers, and all kinds of other furniture made personally by his handiwork. He used to work with incredible devotion, to the unalloyed joy of the abbots of the monastery, from the first crack of dawn till very late at night. At one point, he was blessed with a commission for a particularly large and important work of carpentry for our holy monastery. He worked for several months straight, virtually never emerging from his workshop, and when he wasn't working, he felt himself to be slacking off. He worked so hard that when he finally finished the job, he was feeling ill, so ill that, according to eyewitness accounts, he fell down right there and died. Several monks rushed in upon hearing the alarmed shouts of these eyewitnesses. One of the monks who rushed in was Father John, my father confessor. Father Michael appeared to be showing no signs of life at all. All those who had gathered around him bent their heads in sorrow over his corpse. But suddenly Father John pronounced, "No, he is not dead. He will keep on living." And then he began to pray, and suddenly the immobile carpenter of our monastery opened his eyes again and revived. However, everyone noticed that he appeared to be shaken to the very depths of his soul. Once he had come to a little bit, Father Michael began to beg us to summon the abbot to him. Once the abbot arrived, the ailing monk, with tears in his eyes, begged him for permission to be allowed to take the vows to enter into the great monastic schema. It is said by some that, having heard this independent and unauthorized wish to suddenly take such a great responsibility upon himself, the Father Superior rebuked his monk with his usual gruff severity and ordered the patient not to be an idiot, to get well as quickly as possible and to get back to work, since it seemed that he couldn't die properly. Yet according to the very same story that was told in our monastery, the next morning the abbot himself, without any further discussion or invitation, and indeed in noticeable discomfort, simply appeared at the cell of Father Michael and announced to him that quite soon he would administer the vows to admit him into the great monastic schema. This was so unusual and so in contrast with the typical behavior of our dreaded Father Gabriel that it caused more astonishment among our brotherhood than the fact of Father Michael's having been brought back from the dead. The rumors spread through the monastery that in the night our abbot had been visited by the holy patron of our Pskov Caves monastery, St. Cornelius himself, whose head had been personally cut off by Tsar Ivan the Terrible in the 16th century. Supposedly, St. Cornelius himself had sternly ordered our abbot to immediately grant the wish of his monk who had returned from the next world. I do wish to stress that this is merely a rumor that was then current in the monastery. At any rate, soon afterwards, Father Michael was permitted to take the monastic vows and to join the great schema, and was given the new name of Father Melchizedek. Our abbot gave him this name in honor of one of the most mysterious of the ancient prophets of the Bible. His reason for choosing this particular name also has remained a great mystery. It's especially puzzling since Father Gabriel himself could never once properly even pronounce this Old Testament name, neither during the monastic ceremony nor in all the years that elapsed since that time. No matter how hard he tried, he would always mangle it and stumble on its pronunciation and make a complete hash of it. Immediately afterwards, his mood would grow quite sour, and we were afraid to be anywhere near him at that moment. What we did know in the monastery, however, was that in those few minutes when Father Melchizedek was dead, he had a certain revelation after which he came back to life a completely different person. Father Melchizedek later did relate to some of his close associates and spiritual children a portion of what he had experienced. But even the echoes of what he related seemed utterly unusual. Therefore, I and all my friends naturally wanted to learn something about this mystery from Father Melchizedek himself. And so on that night in the church of St. Lazarus, when I finally gathered up the courage to first ask a question of the schema monk, That was exactly what I asked him. What did he see over there in that land from which no traveler returns? Upon hearing this question, Father Melchizedek stood silently for a long time by the royal gates of the altar, with his head cast down. More than ever, I froze and trembled with justified fear that I had had no right whatsoever to ask anything so impertinent. But finally, in a voice that was very weak from hardly ever speaking, Father Melchizedek began to reply. He said that he had suddenly seen himself standing in the midst of a giant green field. Then he walked on through this field, continuing straight but not knowing where he was going, until his path was blocked by a gigantic moat. There, amidst thick mud and clumps of earth, he saw a multitude of icon frames, church lecterns, and metal overlays for icons. There he also saw crooked tables, broken chairs, and strange wardrobes. As he looked at them, he recognized his own carpentry work. He stood looking at his own work, both recognizing it and yet utterly surprised by it. And suddenly he had the feeling that somebody was standing over his shoulder. He lifted up his eyes and saw that it was the Mother of God. She gazed with melancholy at all of his work of many years, and then she spoke. "You're a monk, and all we wanted from you was just one thing, the main thing, repentance and prayer. Instead of that, you gave us this woodwork." The vision disappeared. The dead man opened his eyes and was once again back at the monastery. After this event, Father Melchizedek was a completely changed man. The focus of his life became exactly what the Holy Mother of God had mentioned to him: repentance and prayer. The fruits of his now exclusively spiritual labors were not delayed, revealing themselves in his deepest humility, his weeping over his past sins, his sincere love for all, and his complete and utter withdrawal from all affairs of this world, his absence from all human interference in his ascetic labors. Thereafter, those fruits were also revealed in the effectiveness of his powerful prayers on behalf of others, and by his ability to foretell the future, something that was noticed by many of us. Having noticed how he had utterly withdrawn from this world, and with what single-minded devotion he focused solely on his spiritual battles, invisible and incomprehensible to us, we, the novices, could only summon the courage to approach him in the most extraordinary of circumstances. Furthermore, almost everybody was afraid of him. It was well known throughout the monastery that Father Melchizedek was an exceedingly strict father confessor. Indeed, he had a right to be so. His unflinching insistence on the purity of spirit of every Christian was nourished by his great love for all people, his deep knowledge of the laws of the spiritual world, and his understanding of how vitally important it is for every human to constantly struggle against sin. This true monk lived in his own higher world, a place where compromise is just not tolerated. But if Father Melchizedek would sometimes give us answers, they were always incredibly accurate, not just powerful, but imbued by some kind of particular and quite uncanny force. There was a period during my life in the monastery when I was inundated with an avalanche of undeserved and cruel, or so they seemed to me, trials. Sorely beset, I vowed to seek advice from the very strictest monk in the entire community, Father Melchizedek. In answer to my knock on his door and to the prayer traditionally said before entering a monk's cell, Father Melchizedek emerged fully dressed in his monk's mantle and stole. I had found him in a moment when he was performing his strict prayer rule. I told him about my misfortunes and seemingly insoluble problems. Father Melchizedek listened to me silently, standing as ever with his head drooping down in melancholy. When I was finished, he lifted up his eyes to me and suddenly burst into tears and wept most bitterly. "My brother," he cried out in inexpressible pain, "why are you asking me for advice? I myself am perishing." This elder, this great, holy, ascetic, spiritual warrior who was standing in front of me and weeping with unstained grief, now was feeling himself to be, in truth, the worst and most sinful man on earth. With each moment he did so, I saw with ever-increasing clarity and joy that all the ridiculous little problems of mine put together, indeed all of those matters that I had thought so insurmountable, were in fact not worth the least little thing. Furthermore, at that very moment, I suddenly felt that all these insignificant problems had suddenly completely vanished and had been lifted from my soul. I already had no need to ask any advice from this elder. He had already done everything that he could for me. I bowed to him in full gratitude and left. Everything on our earth, both the simple and the complicated questions, both the little human problems and the challenges of finding the great path to God, all the secrets of the past, the present, and the future ages, all can be resolved only by such mysterious, ineffably beautiful, and omnipotent humility. And even if we cannot understand its truth and its meaning, and even if it seems for now that we're not ready for this mysterious and all-powerful humility, nonetheless, that humility by itself will reveal itself to us through those incredible persons who are capable of possessing it.